It's the Dearly Departed podcast, featuring your hosts, historian Scott Michaels and filmmaker Mike Dorsey.
And welcome to the Dearly Departed podcast. It's our 30th episode. Can you believe it, Scott?
Yeah, what's the 30th anniversary? There's 25.
What do you get for that?
Yeah, let's see what that is. But yeah, thanks for bearing with us. I know it's been a while, and appreciate it.
Yeah, and while Scott looks that up, I'm Mike Dorsey.
And I'm Scott Michaels.
And this is Dearly Departed podcast. And what do you get for 30?
Pearl. You get a pearl necklace, Mike.
Oh, nice. Oh, yeah, there's no double entendre with that at all.
I don't know what you mean. All right. So
I was going to ask you, since it was just Halloween, and we were going to try and do this for Halloween, because newsflash, we were going to talk about the Universal monsters of the 1930s on this episode. It was a good follow-up to Freaks, Todd Browning's Freaks, which was our last episode, so it's a nice little companion piece with that. But I was thinking about, since it was just Halloween, did you ever have any Halloween traditions growing up, Scott?
Well, we did the trick-or-treating thing. In fact, I was just talking to somebody the other day. I think I could never post pictures of like 75% of the costumes I watched for Halloween because I'd be destroyed. And I'm like, it's just, it's just everything has changed and shifted so drastically that you can't. So all of it was
for next Halloween, you'd have to go with someone who was canceled.
Yes. What would you do? Just put one of those. Yeah, I did go one time as a clown police, and this is back in the 80s. This is before there was an internet, but I did go. We had my friend Bohannon and I. We wore berets. We had we put little clown bozo symbols with slashes through them, and I had a bozo lunchbox, and in it I had clown makeup remover and pins for animals, for balloon animals, and we're just like military with like mag lights and stuff. But it was the anti-clown police, so that was one of the good ones that I can talk about. I was an army kid, but yeah, there's the regular trick-or-treating business. We did the Devil's Night thing too, which was I think that was an exclusive to Detroit thing.
That is a Detroit thing, yeah.
Yeah. So it was the night before Halloween. We called it Devil's Night, and we would go out. It was prank fun. It wasn't nice. It was mean, but it was kids like writing things on windows with soap. It wasn't permanent damage, but It was vandalism. And in the 60s and 70s, it was, it was a little bit more of a nudge, nudge, wink, wink kind of a thing. Now, anyone walking around the night before Halloween is you couldn't do it anymore. But it was just a different time, and I'm not proud of it, but it was just one of those things. And then it became a whole different thing in Detroit where became famous for, people lighting cars on fire and stuff like that. That was after I left Detroit. It became a whole different thing. And so then they decided to rename it Angel Night instead. But the fire department were always, But back when we were kids, it was like throwing eggs and ringing doorbells and running.
Sure.
And that's all it was. So it was more innocent. I'm not saying it was innocent, but anyway. Right. Detroit, man. We were hardcore.
Devil's Night. When I was a little kid, I liked the Disney Channel Halloween stuff on Halloween night. It was always fun to watch because you always go trick-or-treating and then you'd come home and put on, Halloween programming. And, that's not exactly, no Devil's Night for me, I guess. One time in college, one of my more tasteless costumes was I went as Buddy Holly after the plane crash.
Oh.
And my girlfriend at the time went as the president of the Buddy Holly fan club. And she was my
Did they weep? Stand next to you and just cry?
And, it was pretty dark. I'll just say that. It was pretty dark. But her outfit was basically just like a 50s dress, and I had like a cardigan, and I had a guitar at the time, an electric guitar, so I walked around with a Fender. But I put like branches in the Fender. It was It's one of those things that seems okay at the time, but when you get older, you're like,
screw it. It's funny.
It's Halloween.
It's like, Princess Diana with a steering wheel around her neck. That's funny. I'm sorry. Cancel me. The whole thing is that we're inappropriate. It's a laugh. Right. We're not going, hooray, Diana's dead. We're not going, hooray, Buddy Holly's dead. But, for God's sake, just lighten up. I mean, it's in bad taste. That's the whole point. But
exactly, it's not serious.
But I would never tell you what I dressed up as.
News of the week.
Another thing I wanted to talk about, and I know you wanted to talk about this too. Big news. Whenever you think you're having like a bad week or a bad month, Robert Durst was convicted for killing Susan Berman. He got COVID and was also now been charged with his former wife's murder from 1982, all in the span of like a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. So your life could always go worse.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, Durst was, he was the subject of the show, the famous documentary.
The Jinx.
The Jinx, and very famously basically confessed while on camera. And and they could use that, couldn't they? They could use that. He was he was at a urinal and just talking to himself.
Yeah.
But
he was still mic'd.
Yeah, and he gave permission to be recorded, so it was fair game, wasn't it? For them to use that.
Yeah, and the filmmakers always was it Drecki, I think is the filmmaker's name. I think they've claimed that they didn't find that footage until much, much later into the editing process. I don't know if I totally believe that, but whatever. I'll take their word for it.
It makes sense. I mean, because it is a throwaway. If you're going to go, you're going to the bathroom, you would just throw that away.
It's very unusual when you cut camera, though, for sound to keep rolling.
Mm.
And they did show them planning that interview out in detail. They made it part of the film, like they're planning, because it was the second time they were interviewing him. So they were trying to figure out, what questions to ask and whatever. I don't know. I always wonder, I have no inside information on this, but I always wonder if it was completely.
You think it was contrived? It's possible it could be contrived that they did.
Well, they
it for
always
ratings,
knew. They knew he had been caught mumbling on a hot mic in the first interview, and I think his lawyer or a rep or somebody was there with him and went over and had to tell him to shut up, because they're like, they were between. They kind of were taking a break, but he was still sitting in his chair. And this was the first interview where he didn't confess, but he was kind of mumbling things. And a woman went over and warned him, hey, they can hear what you're saying. You need to be careful what you're saying. So as a filmmaker, I mean, just as a hypothetical, as a filmmaker, I would be thinking, okay, we already caught him on a hot mic once. We know he tends to do that. So I will tell my sound guy, hey, when we cut, you keep rolling until I come to you and specifically tell you to cut, because he might say some stuff. So let's get it, and then they got it. But then I guess there's somebody I know that knows the filmmakers, and they're adamant that it was a total accident, and that I guess originally they were going to end the series with the letter, with Beverly Hills misspelled. That was going to be their big reveal moment at the end, and then somewhere toward the end of the editing, they caught that extra audio, found it, and realized they had like something even better than the envelopes. So. I don't know. Yeah. Durst,
well, he's been convicted, so you could say he murdered Susan Berman, who was basically a mob daughter, and lived in Benedict Canyon Boulevard, and was shot in the back of the head. And Durst was convicted, found guilty of her murder. But that
was like 2000 that happened, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And then there was an anonymous letter sent to the Beverly Hills Police Department, and the word Beverly Hills, Beverly, I think, was misspelled, and he had
it was spelled
that.
EY.
It was consistent. It was totally traced back to him. So yeah, he was found guilty, and then that whole, what a bizarre story.
It was a letter where he wrote to let them know that there was he used the word cadaver, so they called it the cadaver letter, but it was to let them know that there was a dead body in Susan Berman's house. So I guess. He was her friend, and he murdered her, so maybe he felt somewhat bad about it and wanted to make sure that they found her body, I guess. Yeah. So he sent that
that would be pretty ugly. Well, it's like 4 doors down from where George Reeves died of a gunshot wound to the head. It's like
crazy.
That whole crazy neighborhood. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we talked about that before, but
the Benedict Canyon curse.
There has to be a Manson connection, doesn't there? We always have one.
Always. Durst is so it's wild. I was surprised that they are now charging him officially with the murder, or I think they've charged or considering charging. I think they did charge him with the murder of his first wife that has never been found. They've always assumed that she was murdered. She disappeared under mysterious circumstances, which was also covered in the Jinx. But they it would be nice if he would at least. Assuming that he was responsible, it would be nice if he would at least tell them where he put her. But I don't know if they'll ever. I don't know if her family will ever get that closure.
Yeah, right. It's what a mess. And he's just this crumpled little old man now, and he's going to die in prison. It's it's sad. It's just so people are demented. Anyway,
what else, man?
Well, there was we should touch on the Alec Baldwin thing. That was crazy. It's so sad and so bad that that there was a live weapon on the set of that movie that Alec Baldwin, really just killed the guy. I mean, it's just the fact that he killed the guy, to kill the woman. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
it's such to have that on your conscience, and just to have that. Is this gun okay? Yes, it's okay. Okay, here you are.
And I mean, here's an actor who's handled tons of firearms throughout his career, and has had you trust the people that handed the armorer on set, and the assistant director have checked it. And for whatever reason, the gun hadn't been checked. And the craziest thing is they're saying it was a real live bullet. Because sometimes when they say live round, that can also mean a blank. But I guess they've since specified, no, it was an actual bullet that came out of the gun. And what in the world a live bullet was doing on a movie set is, it's questions on top of questions with this one. And it makes me really upset to even think about it. But,
there's one other thing, too, that's something that is... And, it's a terrible situation. And this is not in any way being accusatory of anything. But anyone that's handled or learned to handle a firearm, you never pointed at anybody. I know that's part of the movie. So that's what you're supposed to do.
Have to do it.
But it just seems like I would be very uncomfortable, doing that. But just actually, it doesn't even matter what I just said, because the whole point was he's supposed to shoot somebody with it.
And he's supposed to aim the gun at the camera, so there's going to be a person standing there. So he thinks he's holding an empty gun, and he's showing, this is what I'm going to do.
Oh,
and
man,
it goes
to have
off.
that on your conscience, it's so sad.
Yeah.
You would think, that's happened before with John Eric Hexum and Brandon Lee. And, granted, Hexum was a stupid mistake on his part. But they're just, they're making this big deal about there should never be a live ammunition on a movie set. Well, there just shouldn't. They're just done.
Right.
There should not. And I don't see why they don't make fake guns, or why they put real firearms on the set. Fake guns are pretty convincing, and that's what prop people do. So
I mean, I used I had a gun on the set of my the recreations I shot for Murder Rap. We used an airsoft gun, so it's a gun that does not even cannot shoot real bullets to begin with. It's just gas powered. It's made to shoot plastic pellets. So even if it was loaded, which are made to be shot at people, I mean, it can't hurt you, kind of thing.
It just needs to demonstrate some kind of kickback, I guess.
But it shows but the gas power makes the slide pop back on a semi-automatic, so it looks realistic when you're pulling the trigger, and you get a little recoil off of that. I don't understand why. I don't understand why they don't have, to your point, why they don't have guns that go through all the mechanics of shooting a gun, but don't have a barrel and a hammer that actually ignites a round and can fire something down a barrel. I don't understand why you need that part of it. You can have a slide that kicks back when you pull the trigger, and something come out the barrel, the end of the gun, just like pop, like a cap or whatever come out. There's no reason to have I don't understand, a working chamber barrel hammer. I don't understand why you need all that.
Yeah.
So Hutchins was the cinematographer's name who passed away. So rest in peace to her.
Yeah, and God bless her family, man. And Alec Baldwin's family. That's just awful. Anyway,
everybody who was there that day is going to be traumatized from it. So, well, moving on. What else? Do you have any other news, or do you want to move on to hate mail?
Let's move on to hate mail.
Hate mail.
All right. You said you had some good ones.
It's mostly trolling for trolls. I get feedback on my YouTube videos, and I save the comments. Troy's been saving them, and I ask him not to tell me what they say, and just to send them to me for this, because what you'll do is you'll hear these coming out for the first time. These comments have been sent to me. Troy have saved them, and I'm going to read them to you. And
for the first time, you have not seen these yet.
Yeah.
This
okay. Or maybe there's not as many as I hoped. So somebody, I did a true crime artifacts. I was showing some of the things in my collection, and somebody wrote, Alex C wrote, "Why do you collect such shit? Why not collect an entire painting that the subject actually looked at and appreciated the same way you can today, or a car that he or she drove? What the is this broken handles and pieces of pottery? Sorry, but collecting a scrap of a building material is just sad." It's like, okay, well, that's not that good.
Go find your own hobby, Alex.
Yeah. The David White, I did a David White video about him and his son being in the Pan Am Lockerbie bombing. David White played Larry Tate. Somebody called Crazy Train, who has a Manson icon, as with the swastika on his forehead, and said, "Dearly departed tours is an old dinosaur. It's kind of like watching a 1.5-year-old toddler squeal with excitement because they picked up a piece of garbage of the street and think it is a treasure. Boring and redundant." I don't think it's redundant at all. Maybe boring, but I don't think it's redundant.
I think we need to. I think they need to pick a metaphor and stick with it. You're both a dinosaur and a toddler. How's that possible?
That's actually a very good point.
Come on, I'm just saying for the next comment that guy makes, just a little writing tip. Don't mix your metaphors up.
Well, Troy will, he's kind about it, because sometimes they're upsetting because they really, upsetting is not the right word for it, but they're annoying because they go after, they're not even creative. They're just saying you're big and ugly and stupid. It's like, ha ha ha, very funny. And so, that gets exhausting because, I don't want us to tell me what I look like, but anyway, so let's see what this one, okay. I don't even know what this means, and I don't even remember what video it's from. Michael Jackson. This is Michael Jackson. Okay. I did a thing. I knew where he's buried. Jackson, keep her jeans, Jesus, if she needs a meter. Jesus did not Jewish, have had, he has held, ID, is just jealous, I different, January, I'd keep is.
Sounds like somebody had their voice to text on and didn't know it.
Let's see if I can find another one. I plan on preserving the toilet the museum owners will overdose on and sending pictures of it to their families, for history. It's funny.
Haven't you commented on that in the past, though? Like, you want to be on a death tour or something like that someday, or you wouldn't mind it or something like that?
Have I? I said I replied to them.
No. I'm just haven't you ever talked about that before? Because people have criticized you. Said, I hope somebody drives by your house after you die or something like that. Does a tour of your house or whatever, right?
Yeah, I mean that goes back to that thing that the people dying 2 times. The first time you die is when you physically die and draw your last breath, and the second time is when someone says your name for the last time out loud.
Right.
So it's like, well, shit, drive by my house. At least you'll be saying my name,
Right.
I'm fine with that. I don't want to be.
And you're
forgotten.
not around to be offended by it anymore, anyways. So who cares?
That's true. Okay, so that was that one. Somebody was angry about the Cabazon dinosaurs. That doesn't really matter. Let's see.
Wait, somebody was mad about the dinosaurs?
Yeah, the Cabazon dinosaurs. That I posted a video because they painted them to look like the Flintstones.
Yeah.
And so Dino is purple, the dinosaur is purple, and the T-Rex is looking like Frye. And I said, isn't that kind of cool? And they said, I don't think it's cool at all. Just like I don't think it's cool what they did to Hadley's or that other casino is there. Fast food chains have littered the area. What was once an oasis of uniqueness is now just another monument to greed. You can have it. And it's like, or...
I have to agree with them, though. I do hate what they did with Hadley's. out there.
I don't even know what Hadley's is, Mike. That's nothing to me. I don't. What does that mean?
Yeah, so Hadley's for decades and decades was famous for their date shakes. And it was this cool looking, almost like Roadhouse looking freestanding restaurant building that they were in. And now Hadley's is in like a strip mall and is all like clean and modern, and it's still good. I mean, you still get the date I still recommend Hadley's date shakes, but it's not like the charm of it is all gone.
I see.
What they used to have. Yeah, Hadley's. That was big with our family. We used to stop in at Hadley's a lot.
I mean, the dinosaurs are still cool. I mean, I think so. That's just like Americana, that's just something silly on the side of the road, and whatever. I mean, they were all faded out and falling apart a couple of years ago. So now they embrace it and they're kitschy and they're fun. Anyway,
and by repainting them, they keep generating new interest in them, so they don't get kind of so they don't turn into dinosaurs. And they've got they have new things in their gift shop. So it's like a cooler vibe to it than it used to be. They embrace the kitsch, and I think it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Let's see. This one is, I did a thing about Princess Grace's hearse. And I went to the National Museum of Funeral History in Houston, and I opened up the hearse and I sat in it, the hearse that carried Princess Grace's body. So I was rude. It was rude and indignant in letter N. Disgusting of you to open up the hearse in sitting in it. Disrespectful to Princess Grace. I was liking the video up to that point. I will not subscribe. Sad face. So yeah, I wrote, my comment was, "Oh no, please don't go. Please, I beg you."
By the way, speaking of Princess Grace, a few months ago, I found like a little short documentary that was shot back at the time when she got married. It was all about the wedding preparations and the wedding day, all that stuff in Monaco. It was interesting. It was very, positive, rah-rah kind of a documentary about the day, but it was really entertaining and informative, and it was cool to see all the footage, all the old 16 millimeter footage it looked like that they shot of all that stuff. It's interesting because who was an integral part of doing that. I think we may have talked about that, but the documentary "The Royal Family" that Prince Philip sort of when Queen Elizabeth, he was sort of, they featured in the Crown quite heavily, but he was spearheaded this drive to sort of open the doors on the royal family and show them as normal people, or humans, not normal, because they'll never humanize
be normal.
Them,
but yeah, and it was very interesting. So they're kind of just going on to that sort of theme, is showing them as humans. And plus, she was a princess, she was a movie star, and fascinating, interesting story and tragic death.
And I mean, Rear Window is my favorite movie, and she was just like iconic level gorgeous in that film. So.
So I did this other video really recently. The last one I did was this lady who has a wax museum in her house. Mm-hmm. She has literally the Movieland Wax Museum. She has the entire Wizard of Oz in her bed, in her living room, with the yellow brick road and the trees. She has the Phantom of the Opera with the organ, like a real organ. This is in her living room. She has a W.C. Fields. She has there's the Shaggy DA and the absent-minded professor, Fred McMurray, in a car that flew. She has the car hanging in her living room. I mean, it's a life-size car with Fred McMurray's wax statue, and the wheels spin, and it's the whole deal. I mean, this one, but also the most recent thing she has is Jimmy Stewart from the Movieland Wax Museum. So she has Jimmy Stewart there with him in his cast, and she has the entire background that was there. I mean, the furniture and everything that was on the shelves behind him, and the pictures of Jimmy Stewart there with when he unveiled it. And it's I love wax museums anyway. It's like a fetish of mine. And this, but I saw her on YouTube. She's got a channel called The Weird and the Wonderful. Her name's Cynthia Lazarus, and she said, "Yeah, come on and visit." And I walked in, and I was like, she's got Linda Blair with her head spinning at her staircase. She has the giant chariot from Ben-Hur in her family room. Upstairs she has the Marx Brothers. I mean, the entire Marx Brothers. It's insane. And she has Elvira's wedding dress, like Cassandra Peterson, and it's unbelievable. I wish you could sit. It's unbelievable. Yeah,
Wow.
she's hilarious. She's funny. She's sweet, and she collects wax museums. Literally, a wax museum. So
wow.
Yeah.
So check out that YouTube channel. What was it again?
Yeah, Weird and Wonderful. Yeah,
Weird
she's
and Wonderful.
Great. Well, if you go to my Dearly Departed Tours, you'll find that's my last video, and you can go. It's linked to her, and you'll see it. It's just she's so sweet.
Cool.
She's amazing. Yeah. So.
Is that all the hate mail?
I think. Oh yeah, that's all my hate mail. That's all my. Hate mail.
Okay. All right. Well, do we want to get into the main feature?
I think we should.
It's time for the main feature.
All right. It is Universal Monsters is our theme of this episode. The great monster movies of the 1930s from Universal Studios. Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, the Dracula, Wolfman, the other Frankenstein sequels that came out that decade. And were just a huge success for Universal in the 30s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Phantom of the Opera. I mean, they're so it just goes. It's. I love the Universal monsters. I mean, it made them, and it really put them on the map. I think the monsters did, and as I said in our Patreon episode that we recorded a little bit earlier for the people that subscribe to the channel, the Universal kind of just blew off the monsters. They didn't really acknowledge it. When you went to Universal Studios, you never saw. It was all it was all whatever was recent. Now it's all Harry Potter junk. But now you'll see Bela Lugosi there, and you'll see things like that.
Yeah.
Whereas before, they really wasn't anything that they ever really thought to embrace. So,
a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I don't know how long it was, they tried to reboot their classical monster franchises, and they did a Tom Cruise movie with The Mummy, and it was not good. It was not
Tom
good.
Cruise,
and can you believe you that's how great it did? You don't even remember that it happened. Yeah, it was called. I think it was just The Mummy. It wasn't like the Brendan Fraser ones. It was like a new
I remember now.
I
forgot about that. I did see that, and
it was 2017, and Russell Crowe was in it.
Wow.
And it was. I don't like to dog other people's movies because I make movies too, and so I try not to be critical publicly. But it was not good. It was not good.
Mm-hmm.
It was just kind of a mess, and it didn't do well, and that was kind of the end of it. I don't think they're gonna. I mean, if they do try to get that going again, it won't be whatever direction they were going. I think at that time. So yeah, it was not great. It was weird. It was like overly serious, and I don't know. It wasn't fun like the Brendan Fraser Mummy movies that were kind of like Indiana Jones type things.
Yeah,
it was set in modern times, and it was weird.
Yeah, so something that Tom Cruise didn't touch, that didn't turn to gold. And
which normally, whatever, say what you will about him, he usually picks really good projects, and there's always the screenplays are always good. He's got a good track record. He doesn't usually make bad stuff. So it was a rare misfire. So what do you want to start with?
Well, let's go into Frankenstein. I know it's not the first, but Frankenstein is the first on my list.
So that's director James Whale.
Again, and produced by Carl Laemmle. But James Whale, who we haven't talked about him before, have we? We talked about Todd Browning, but not James Whale, have we?
I don't. We may have mentioned him in passing before, but no, I don't know that we've ever dove in.
Okay, well, I mean, James Whale was he directed Frankenstein. He directed Bride of Frankenstein. He did like horror movies, Invisible Man. Yeah.
Yep.
And
another one called The Old Dark House.
He was something else, and that film that they made about him was really interesting. If you ever got a chance to see it, speaking of Brendan Fraser, it was called Gods and Monsters.
Really good film.
Yeah, I really like that a lot.
Ian McKellen plays Whale, and Fraser plays a fictionalized gardener character working at Whale's house. And when Whale is, his career is basically over. He's an old man. And Whale was a very rare bird for his time. He was openly gay. And had a live-in companion, David Lewis, who they lived together for over 20 years, and it was open. Everybody knew about it, which back then was almost unheard of. And David Lewis, his partner, was Irving Thalberg's assistant. Irving Thalberg, one of my favorite people in Hollywood history, who was the head of production for MGM, and one of the early. I mean, Irving Thalberg was a major early force in the film industry, and the Producers Guild every year still gives out an Irving Thalberg Award that is dedicated in his honor. But David Lewis, who was James Whale's partner, was Irving Thalberg's assistant. I mean, drove him around, would hang out with him at his house, and then James Whale was, a director. So, and then later on, after Thalberg died, a lot of people that had been kind of protected by Thalberg they kind of had to find somewhere else to go, and David Lewis was one of those guys, I think. But David Lewis went on to be a producer in his own right and produced films, I think, into the 60s. So, or at least the 50s.
So James Whale died in 57, May 29th, 1957, by drowning in his swimming pool. And it was a suicide. It was. They said it was accidental, but shortly before his boyfriend died, said he stumbled on a note and said that basically, it was. Or he didn't stumble on it; he had it the whole time. He just didn't release what the note said. But it was a suicide note. I think Whale had
asked not to be released until he was dead, or something like that. Yeah, it was kept secret for a long time. Yeah.
So it was funny because I was watching the Academy Awards. It had to be about 20 years ago now. And Goldie Hawn was giving out an award or receiving one. I think she was presenting an award, and the subject of Frankenstein came up, and James Whale came up, and she goes, "Oh, I live in his house. He drowned in my swimming pool." And it was Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell ended up buying James Whale's house that he drowned in. It's just it wasn't something, actually, she didn't say he drowned in her pool, but she did say, I live in the house where he lived. And I just knew but it was, kind of funny. Not funny,
I think that
weird.
house is still around too, I believe too. Yeah. It's nice.
It's in the Palisades. House. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But, it was a cool little house. And, it's, I don't think they still live in it, but they did.
Basically, what's wild with Whale is he's a good example of, it seemed to be especially true in the early days of Hollywood. He was red hot for like 5 or 6 years with Universal, and then the bottom just falls out. He has like kind of one not good film, and there's the old saying in Hollywood, you're only as good as the last thing you did, and it's crazy how fast you can kind of fall off that wagon and not be hot anymore. And his career was basically over by by the 40s. So yeah, it's really wild. And then he, I guess, had a series of serious health issues, and that's what his suicide note referenced, was just that he was in almost constant agony, basically, because all his health issues. So, and
only 67 years old. That's sad. It's yeah. It was a fascinating movie. That was, and it was really well
Gods
done.
And Monsters.
Really well done. Yeah. I loved that like Elsa Lanchester's character was in there, Charles Lawton character, and it was just, that whole 30s horror movie, people just being normal people. It was so cool. I liked it.
Right. But yeah, so James, he passed away on May 29th, 1957. By then, he and Lewis had separated, and he dated several other young men, which is kind of what Brendan Fraser, I think, is kind of an amalgamation of the kind of 20-something, young guys that were around Whale toward the end.
I didn't realize they broke up. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Because Whale, I guess, went, after his career kind of cratered, he went to France for a while and came back to the U.S. with the French waiter, I think, that he met over there. And Lewis obviously was not okay with that. And so that was, Lewis moved out, and that was kind of the end of it. But I think he and Lewis stayed close, remained close friends for years afterwards. But yeah, weren't together anymore. I also thought this was very interesting. Whale, one of his early gigs, he worked on Hell's Angels, the Howard Hughes film. He was Jean Harlow's dialogue coach.
Oh, interesting.
And is kind of an uncredited director, because Hell's Angels famously they started making it when they were still doing silent films, and then all of a sudden talkies became the rage, and they were still working on the movie, and they were like, we got to make this thing into a sound movie. And so they needed a guy, suddenly they needed directors who had stage directing experience, which is where James Whale had come from. He had directed plays in London and on Broadway, so he came in as a, quote, dialogue coach to basically direct all the new scenes that they were doing that had dialogue in them. And so they needed people that had experience directing actors who were actually speaking, I guess, which most film directors at the time never had to deal with.
Yeah.
So it was all pantomime, you know.
Was he from England originally?
I believe he was British, yeah.
Because I wonder what kind of dialogue he taught.
He had good British diction.
Actor, yeah. That Actorland accent.
Yep. In fact, I think it was him. I think he had fought in World War I and had been captured and was it him? I think had been captured and had been a POW for a number of years, or for however time during World War I.
World War I broke out in August 1914. Had little interest in politics. Realized things. Stationed in Bristol, subsequently commissioned second lieutenant in Worcestershire, taken prisoner of war in battle at the Western Front in Flanders in 1917, and was held at the officers' camp. And he stayed there until the end of the war, like a little over a year. Huh.
And it was while he was a POW that he became interested in drama, because they, the POWs, to pass the time, would do, stage productions and stuff. And I think that's where he discovered that he liked to do that, and that started his career.
And I think Carl Laemmle wanted Whale right away, didn't he, to do the directing for the horror movies. I'm pretty sure that Laemmle is the one. 1931, Universal chief Carl Laemmle offered Whale his choice of any property, and Whale chose Frankenstein. So interesting, but.
Right.
But great. And it was 1931 it was made. Those movies, I was watching, I think you watched them too. I watched Dracula, I watched Frankenstein, I watched Phantom of the Opera. It was like hour 10 minutes, hour long. It was like,
they're nice and short. They're like 70 minutes, 75 minutes. I love it.
Yeah. I went to see that James Bond movie. It was like it was 2 hours, 40 minutes at that new James Bond movie. It was like, oh my God. I'm not going to say I was bored, but it was like, oh my God, you could say a lot in a lot less time,
Right. And they did back. Well, film was expensive, so you want to keep it short back then when you could.
Right.
Although the silent era, there was some crazy 4 hour plus long epics.
That's true. What was it? It wasn't that original one that was done by Eric von
Intolerance
Stroheim?
and Greed and Intolerance.
Greed.
And all those.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
It was like 10 hours or something.
Which, you want to talk about things going slow, a movie that's that long with no dialogue.
Yeah, and also it's funny because Nosferatu is riffing on the Dracula thing a little bit. I found that really hard to sit through. We've talked about that. Silent movies are a little bit rough for me, but if you watch Nosferatu on fast forward, it's perfect. You could read all the cards and you're not missing any of the action. And it's great. So just watch it on fast forward. Half the time you get the movie, and it works.
Yeah,
Nosferatu was a good movie too, but better when it's fast forwarded in my mind.
Also, what was really interesting about these, if you're a film nerd, what was really interesting about the Universal horror films was the influence of German Expressionism on the look. The severe, the strong shadows, the severe contrast between dark and light images on the screen, just severe lighting, really expressionistic and interesting. I mean, if you want like a more modern example, early Tim Burton stuff, like Tim Burton's Batman movies are a good example of that. Just really wild shapes and contrasty and moody.
And really well done, because you know that a lot of it was matte, the background were matte, but considering the time period they did it in, I mean, there was something I noticed, like, wow, these sets, everything is really good. Granted, black and white is an art form because of the lighting, et cetera, and you have to say so much more with less information as far as color goes, because it doesn't translate as well. And that was really, you do have an appreciation for the artistry for something like that, because they were stunning movies.
Practical in-camera effects, as they say. Yeah, one thing that speaking of that, one thing that jumped out to me was I watched The Bride of Frankenstein this week, and there's a scene where there's like little miniature people in glass jars.
Oh yeah.
I was like, I don't totally know how they did that back then, because that was like 1936 or 35. I know how they did it, but I don't know how they did it. Like today, you could do it in a day. It would be easy. You just green screen it. But it was so well done. It was really well done. So I know how it didn't look, it looked very real for its time. The way they did that. It was I just kept watching it, like, was very impressed.
It was mesmerizing. Yeah.
I also loved The Bride of Frankenstein. I think I liked it more than the original film, because it was fun.
Yeah, it was campy. I was surprised at how campy it was, actually. It was a lot more lighthearted and less sinister. I mean, the Frankenstein had full dialogue. I mean, and he was just, within the span of like a day, he learned, how to have conversations. Right. And I learned how to smoke and all this kind of silly stuff. So
it's funny. People talk about camp, and obviously that's part of it. But I also wonder if it wasn't the fact that screwball comedies took off in the early 30s. After the first Frankenstein came out. And I wonder if that didn't play some part in it, because it was kind of like over the top comedy a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It was broad. Some of it, yeah. And it's funny. When I thought about it, like Young Frankenstein, the Mel Brooks film, is much more Bride of Frankenstein than Frankenstein, than the original film, And it was, and another one was the Rocky Horror Picture Show. That's the Frankenstein story, basically, and it's more Bride than it is Frankenstein. Frankenstein was a serious movie. It was a horrifying movie, and Bride, it was a bit more. It was like probably the first sequel they ever did, and
it's almost like what they did with Gremlins 2. They just went for it on the second movie. You know what I mean? Like, let's just have fun and do crazy stuff with it. Yeah.
So, so it's based on the novel by Mary Shelley, and Mary Shelley, it was interesting in the credits, they billed her as Mrs. Percy Shelley, not Mary Shelley. So it was she went by her husband's name. She was married to Percy, the philosopher and the poet. And he died, he was like drowned in a ship accident. Is like his body washed up like 10 days later, and in like Rome or something, and they ended up cremating him there, but his heart didn't burn, so they left his body in Italy, I believe, is where he washed up, and gave his heart to Mary Shelley. They said it was calcified or something like that. So Mary Shelley's buried in Bournemouth in England with her husband's heart. Just as hard, because it's interesting, because she was so, Frankenstein came out of this woman's brain, so right. She's clearly thinking in a pretty bizarre manner. So and she died in 1851 of a brain tumor. But it's interesting, and they didn't even give her name when she when in the movie it was Mrs. Percy B. Shelley, not Mary Shelley. So it was just fascinating for that time period.
We're talking about Frankenstein. You want to talk about Boris Karloff?
Yeah. Not a single line of dialogue, just a lot of grunts and a lot of couldn't even know it was who it was. Didn't even get a credit, did he?
Right. Yeah, it's just in the opening credits, it just says the monster and with a question mark next to it. Whereas, of course, all the other actors were credited next to their names, their character names. And then I also thought it was interesting that in The Bride of Frankenstein, 4 years later, they credited the monster as just Karloff. his last name only. And then for the monster's mate, they did the same thing with the question mark. They didn't give Elsa Lanchester a credit in that either.
But she did get one because she played Mary Shelley at the beginning.
I totally didn't pick up on that either.
Yeah, she was. It was her and Percy, her husband, and someone else sitting around in a parlor, and she was doing needlepoint or something, and talking about, come on, Mary, you've got some story, or and then she goes into the bride. But that goes into the movie.
And they did this weird. They did a weird recap, kind of like what today would be like, on the last episode, just to catch audiences up on what happened in the first movie, just in case you didn't see the first movie, you'd know what was going on, kind of deal. Yeah, it was really funny.
Yeah. I think it was it 5 years from the original one that they did. I believe it was Frankenstein. Bride of Frankenstein was done in 1935. So 31 was the original. So it was about a 4. And they still had, I think they still had the original props laying around. So they were still able to use the sets from that.
And speaking of Karloff, his apparently each one of his shoes for Frankenstein's monster was, I think they had 4-inch soles on them. Each one, I think, weighed 11 pounds. And it took him hours and hours and hours to get into makeup. And I think he ended up later in his career being a real advocate. We talked earlier about, on the set and how crews are treated and stuff. I think he became an advocate later on for, hours, because he had to spend so many hours in makeup to get all that stuff put on him. And it was just it was a lot to ask of a person, I think is what it came down to. So he kind of became an advocate for actors' rights and time, how much time they spend on sets, and how, you go through 6-7 hours of makeup before you even start acting.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So it's interesting. He became famous for not having a single line. Of course, in Bride of Frankenstein came about. He had complete, dialogue. I mean, he knew how to.
He learned how to
within
talk.
a day. He could talk about everything. Wife, smoke.
And what's really what I find ironic is that we're going to talk about Bela Lugosi in a bit. Bela Lugosi had the thick Hungarian accent, which actually kept him from getting a lot of roles. Other roles in his career, because a lot of times he was difficult to understand his English, and yet he gets all the speaking parts with the Dracula character, and Boris Karloff, who's British and has excellent diction, gets a monster that doesn't talk.
Yeah,
that was kind of odd.
It is funny. And I don't know how realistic that rivalry was between the two of them. I think that Bela wanted more parts. I think they say Bela was offered or refused. It was refused Frankenstein. I think that's what it was. That Bela Lugosi claimed he was offered to it, but yeah, Bela Lugosi. But they say that Bela and Boris Karloff had a feud because they're both horror film stars. But
at Universal, Frankenstein and Dracula came out the same year. So, you can kind of see how it would have come from. And I guess they got along more or less okay, at least for a time. I don't know. But, Boris Karloff ended up having the far better career in the long run than Lugosi did, I think.
So. Yes, certainly, yeah. And there was the way it was represented in the movie Ed Wood was quite funny. The way that he referred to, Karloff, that cocksucker, it was pretty funny. I love that. But so Karloff, though, good on him. So he and Bela were sort of neck and neck. He was in The Walking Dead in 1936. He was in The Invisible Ray in 1936. Both of them ended up doing spoofy Abbott and Costello movies, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which is a connection to the murder of Robert Lees, the little screenwriter that got murdered in Hollywood, got his head cut off by the hustler. He was a screenwriter for Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Yeah. And Lugosi and Karloff were both together in Son of Frankenstein, right?
I think so. Yeah,
they were both. I think so. Together, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. They.
Someone finally had the idea. Let's put them together.
There's so many of those outrageous, comedy. After a while, they just didn't care. They're put the Wolfman in there. It was a teenage Wolfman. Do that. Godzilla versus Frankenstein. Yeah, do that. And it just didn't matter after a while. They just went and did their thing. And then he went on to have quite a success as a voice actor too.
Yeah, he was the Grinch.
Yeah, The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, and he ended up doing a lot of silly movies too. He was in The Ghost in the Invisible Bikini, where his character name was like the Ghoul or something like that. And it's interesting because we talked about in the Patreon episode, Tommy Kirk, the Disney kid, was in that movie as well. The one that just died not that long ago. But Grinch Stole Christmas. Yeah, he was the Grinch. Thurl Ravenscroft sang the song. He was the guy that was Tony the Tiger, which is pretty cool.
Oh, really?
They're great. Yeah, Thurl Ravenscroft. And I think he was Captain Crunch too. And,
oh, wow.
I love that. But yeah, and he was doing some kind of silly movies towards the end, beach movies, because a lot of them were. I remember that Buster Keaton, he was doing them too. Beach movies, just kind of trash, throwaway, I've got a week to kill movies. And but anyway, he ended up, Boris Karloff ended up passing away in February of 69. He was 81. And
he apparently was a heavy smoker, and he only had like half of a functioning lung yet left at the end. And so he died from pneumonia, basically. So when you have half of a functioning lung, you don't want to get pneumonia. And that was the end. No. Yeah, he was cremated, and his ashes. Well, there's a plaque for him at the Actors Church in London in Covent Garden, and I think that's where his ashes are, in a wall, because there's a wall outside, but there's also a bench with his name on it. But that's where his cremains are, in the Actors Church in Covent Garden in London. Wow. And he was 81 years old. But it's interesting. We were talking about just a second ago. Richard O'Brien. I wrote a book about the Rocky Horror Picture Show several years ago. I interviewed, most everyone that was involved with it. And Richard O'Brien, who wrote basically the story, made it, of course, his own, was sued by a woman who claims that he stole her idea of, I don't know, a transvestite that comes from outer space, and I guess, but she sued him, and he ended up not having to go to court because he's like, well, we both ripped off Mary Shelley. You can't, if you wrote the story, we both owe our careers to Mary Shelley. So what are you even saying? But yeah, I thought it was a clever way to put it, because I never really thought of it that way. But there was some sort of, provenance or how you can get away with a lot of stuff with, like we talked about Elf, how they did the Rankin Bass stuff. It wasn't even it was just straight up, here are your props. You're basically remaking the props. And, and that's what they were doing. So that's interesting. But I guess Frankenstein's probably public domain now anyway, the novel. Yeah, that's I think why a lot of those why they went back and dove into those books from the 1800s, because they were public domain, and there was no one to pay for the rights. Yeah. I mean, Disney kind of did the same thing with some of their early movies, similar situation.
Oh yeah,
doing like old fairy tale stuff. Well, since we're talking about Frankenstein, might as well mention Elsa Lanchester, right?
Sure. Yeah. And yeah.
She was the bride in Bride of Frankenstein. I thought she was great in it. I have to mention, she is in my favorite Christmas movie that I mention, seems like every other episode. She was the housekeeper in The Bishop's Wife with David Niven and Loretta Young and Cary Grant. Yep. It's a sizable role.
A fascinating lady. I know. I love her because the choices she made, granted, maybe she didn't have a lot of choices, and she ended up taking a lot of horror movie roles after The Bride of Frankenstein. That's clearly not, but she played housekeeper roles too. It's another one of those British, sturdy women, for lack of a better term. Well, it's the only term I could think of, that were often cast. She was in Mary Poppins as a housekeeper, and
she got typecast as a housekeeper.
Yeah, well, it's like the butler thing. It's just that they're British, and stick them in the kitchen. but yeah. So and she was married to Charles Laughton, who famously played the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and yeah, and so it was in, I think, 1927 that was made.
Well, or was he in the 1939 version, or is in the
39. No, you're right. It's 39. He played Quasimodo. It was 27 was the first time it was done. The silent version.
Apparently, Elsa and Charles Laughton were in 12 films together.
That many, eh? Okay.
Which is wild.
Interesting.
And also, Laughton is also famous for, he basically helped launch the career of Maureen O'Hara. He I guess, because she was in a Hitchcock film, I think Jamaica Inn, and Laughton was impressed by her. And basically, when Laughton came over to do The Hunchback, he kind of insisted that they cast Maureen O'Hara, who was like 18 or 19, as Esmeralda, and that was it. The rest was history. Her stardom took off from there.
That's that. Yeah, I like Charles Laughton is a fascinating character. He was, and my God, the Night of the Hunter. You know, that movie is probably the most visually insane movie ever made. Yeah. It's the only movie I think he ever directed, I believe.
It is, yeah.
He was sort of laughed out of the theater when it was
kind of overlooked when it came out. Now it's considered a total classic.
Yeah, it was a disaster. I think as long as he lived, it was a disastrous movie. But oh my God, it's so scary as hell. It is a really good movie, and it looks amazing. You know, it looks like Tim Burton's probably borrowed a lot of that too, because but it's all live action. But the imagery, those little kids running away from that sinister preacher, and oh, that's a good movie. That is a scary as hell movie. That thing, did we talk about this before? Yeah, we did with the Poseidon Adventure episode. We were talking about Shelley Winters in the movie, how she's killed and she's at the bottom of the lake in a car tied up. And then they show her at the bottom of the lake with the seaweed in her hair. Right. Oh man, and then you see a fish hook go by her head.
Fishing lure go by.
It was insane. That was a great movie, but anyway, so that was Charles Laughton, but Elsa Lanchester, and he had an acting school in Hollywood, and they taught Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe took acting lessons. Oh,
wow. Them. I did not know that.
Which is kind of interesting. Yeah. Their house was right off of, where that old abandoned house was off Sierra Bonita, where the James Dean house is, that just across that park, is where their house was. But anyway.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, Elsa Lanchester passed away on January 5th, 1987. She was 84. And Charles Laughton, her husband, had passed away 2 decades earlier. He died December 15th, 1962. He was only 63. He died from renal cancer.
There was a story that came out on him with Scotty Bowers wrote that book, Full Service, this really trashy book. He said he was like a pimp.
Right.
And what he said about Charles Laughton, it was insane. It was stuff about, like Nutella. I'll leave it at that.
Stuff like
Nutella.
Use your imagination.
But he was gay. And she found out about it. Apparently, the story is, or the legend is, that she walked home. She came home and found him on a sofa with a young man, and she threw the sofa out the window and never spoke about it again. That's the legend.
Sure.
Now I think she wrote an autobiography and mentions it there about his homosexuality. So,
well, I read some that she tried in her book. She tried to blame the fact that she never had kids on the fact that he was gay, but then other people that were close with him said no, he was actually bi, and the reason that she didn't have kids was either because she didn't want to or because of medical issues that she had. So I don't know what the real issue was, but.
Yeah, but it's an interesting marriage for sure. Yeah. And she had, and I love that her choices though. She, she did the movie. She did an amazing episode of the Night Gallery, that Rod Serling show, where she, with green, literally like fingers that were plants. And Willard, she played the crazy mother in Willard, the rat movie. I love that. She was in Murder by Death, which if you haven't seen Murder by Death, that was made in 76. And it has all these old, now like Maggie Smith and David Niven played old detective. Peter Lorre played Sam Spade. I mean Peter Peter Falk played Sam Spade, and Charlie Chan was played by Peter Sellers. All these, and she played Miss Marple, I think it was. I think it was like an Agatha Christie thing too. Anyway, it was a great movie. A very, very funny movie. Truman Capote, Nancy Walker, one of those all-star casts. Mm-hmm. Anyway, the point that I think you probably just delete all that shit. What I found, what was interesting, this was something I found about Elsa Lanchester and her hair in Bride of Frankenstein, the famous Hostess Cupcake hairdo,
Yeah.
Yeah. And I found a couple of quotes about it, and she said, oh, shit. Alexa, stop.
Alexa,
so I found a couple,
stop. Stop, Alexa. No, stop.
I found a couple of quotes about her and her hair, and she said it was accomplished by combing it over a wire mesh cage. And she said it was extremely painful, and her eyes were kept taped wide open for the long takes.
I always assumed it was a wig. Why would they do that to her real hair?
Well, I would imagine it was hair pieces, but it was like, it was a cage basically. It had to be
stitched together, hair. I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
But she said the most memorable thing I did in that film, I believe, was my screaming. In all my movies since, I've been called upon to scream. I don't know if it's by chance, but I'd like to think that I'm not hired for that talent alone. And she says it annoys me when mothers drag their poor dears to me and demand the children say something to Frankenstein's bride. Can you imagine an actress being overexposed by a picture she made 40 years ago? Okay, some people would kill for that, and literally kill for that. And on her marriage to Charles Lawton, she said, "We both needed other company. I met his young man." This is something I guess she said. So I met his young man, and I had a young man around that Charles didn't even argue about.
Oh, interesting.
So apparently, it was well known to them both. Eventually, you're just gonna whatever. That's I guess. But yeah. She
All
said,
right.
Back to Charles Lawton said, "I have a face that would stop a sundial." That's funny. That's very funny.
He did have an odd face. That is for sure.
Yeah.
So you want to move on to Dracula? I want.
Oh, sure. One thing that's kind of interesting to talk about. This is something that should be, and I think it relates to Dracula well. So it's a good segue. All right. Dwight Frye, who played Fritz in Frankenstein, was the guy who played Renfield in Dracula.
Both kind of sidekicks to villain-ish like characters, but very, very physically very different performances. And it's in the same year he did those two movies. It's crazy. He's in both. Yeah.
It's very interesting. So he was, and also I'm sure we're going to get flack because we call Boris Karloff Frankenstein, but it's actually the Frankenstein Monster. It was Dr. Frankenstein, right. So we're aware of that.
Although if you ever watch the movie, there is at least one instance where they refer to him as Frankenstein, I believe. Not just
it works for me. Frankenstein,
but that is a common mistake that people make. Dr. Frankenstein is the doctor who created Frankenstein's monster, which is the monster, But everybody just calls
who's now known as Frankenstein.
Just accept that we all call the monster Frankenstein. Just everybody.
If you look it up, Google Frankenstein, you're not going to get Colin Clive. You're going to get Boris Karloff.
Right. You're not going to get you're not going to get a Colin Clive Halloween mask. You're going to get a Boris Karloff Halloween mask. All right.
Damn right. So Dwight Frye, he played Renfield in Dracula, played Fritz in Frankenstein. He was also in The Invisible Man and in The Bride of Frankenstein.
Wow.
And he was never called Igor. Igor was a word, I think, that came out of the Shelley novel. It was never used ever in any of the films. So, it's always an Igor name, but that was in the Mary Shelley book, not in any movies.
That's interesting. I noticed they called him Fritz, and I thought that was odd because he seemed like the Igor type character, but they didn't call him.
Yeah, that. And then Young Frankenstein, it's Igor. So
why wouldn't they? Why would they change that? I wonder.
But apparently Dwight Frye died on a bus in Hollywood.
Yeah, I believe he was riding, he had been to the movies with, I think, his son maybe or something, and they were riding a bus coming home. And yeah, he had a heart attack.
I went on a deep dive looking for that, and I couldn't find anything. It said that he died on a bus, and I went through all the 1943 papers, and it mentions that he died, of a heart attack, but it doesn't tell you where or doesn't tell you that it was on he's pronounced dead, right. I believe, at the Hollywood Hospital, which is now the Wilcox Police Station. That's where it was. Same place Fred Mertz was pronounced dead.
Yeah, he was only 44, and he had apparently had a heart condition, and he just had a heart attack. Man, and this is like a recurring theme, and it's going to come up again in this episode, is young people, especially young actors, youngish at least, 20s, 30s, 40s, who you would think are, in fit condition, and I think it's just a result of the era that they were in, just so many like serious heart and health issues that a lot of these actors had, that they seems like
they were probably taking
youngish.
Mercury cocktails and asbestos, the costumes.
The costumes were horrible for them to make up. I mean, there's of course all the famous makeup from The Wizard of Oz and the incidents they had with that, but also just there was really no health and fitness science, at least not in the way that we know it today. And people just drank heavily and smoked heavily, and their bodies were just ripped up. It's like they aged faster because the way they lived. And then there were also there were a lot of like serious health conditions that aren't as big of a deal now that we've kind of learned to deal with, that they had no answer to back then too, on top of that. So and
mental health issues too that were just get over it kind of thing, like Colin Clive. Colin Clive was a guy that was just destroyed by drinking. And
if we want to talk about Colin Clive,
sure. Yeah, I don't have a lot of information about him, but
I really wanted to talk about him because he was kind of a fascinating character. Of course, he's Dr. Frankenstein. He's famous for the, it's alive, famous quote when Frankenstein Monster, comes alive. He's talking about how he knows what it's like to be a god, which is what Frankenstein's kind of all about, right? Man pretending to be God, and then it backfiring on him. So he apparently had tuberculosis, and then was a pretty bad alcoholic. And it was his alcohol issues were well known. I guess it was always passing out on set, when they weren't rolling. And I even saw, I don't know if this is true, but I saw one claim that like when they would go to do over the shoulder shots on him, there were times when he had to be held up practically to stand in the shot. Because he's just a kind of a fall down drunk alcoholic, unfortunately. And he had tuberculosis on top of that. So that's a bad combination. And he passed away in 1937, which was just 2 years after Bride of Frankenstein. So he was only 37 years old himself. And I guess Peter Lorre was one of his pallbearers.
Yeah, I think he was at Under McKinley on Hollywood Boulevard, which is where Bela, which is where the Fritz guy, Dwight Frye, and Criswell and all those guys were all buried out of that mortuary.
So here's what I heard. I correct me if I'm wrong, but he was cremated at Chapel of the Pines.
Oh, was he? Okay, is that where? Well, he's okay. So that
I don't know
makes
where
sense.
the memorial was held, though. I mean, I don't think the memorial was held at the crematorium, but so it might have been.
Right.
I don't know. But here's what's weird. So 300 people show up at his funeral, and then he wasn't buried. He was cremated, and apparently his cremains sat in the basement of the crematorium for 40 years. Yeah. And it wasn't until 1978 that they were finally like, we should do something with this guy. And they went and scattered him at sea. But he sat there for over 40 years. And apparently the reason that I read is, or the speculation is, that he was married back in England before he moved to the U.S. And when he came to Hollywood, he left his wife behind, and they, I think, were separated by this point. And then I think he had girlfriends or whatever out here. And so the only person that could legally take possession of his cremains was his wife. And they were separated and estranged, and I guess she didn't want him or didn't want to go through the hassle of bringing him back to England or whatever, and so no one claimed him or could legally claim them but her, and that was it. And you've run into those situations when you do the headstones for people trying to get permission, right?
Yeah. So, at Chapel of the Pines, that was mostly a crematorium. Now they have burials, or columbariums is when they bury ashes, so they have a lot of that around there now. But underneath it is storage. And there are thousands of people underneath there in boxes with names on them. And to get, there are a lot of actors down there. One of the people we were looking for was Steven Stucker, who played Johnny in Airplane. I can make a brooch, I can make a pterodactyl.
Yeah.
He was down there for many years too. And you have to go through a legal process to get them out, because you have to prove there's no next of kin. Ann Sheridan is another actress. My friend Karen McHale went through that whole legal process. They did find someone that was a next of kin to sign the paperwork to have that person removed from basically a shelf in the basement, and then presented to this family member, who then they buried or put her in a columbarium in Hollywood Cemetery. So there's a long, exhausting process that you have to go through legally to get somebody's cremains.
And I guess, it's once you do it, if you scatter someone at sea, you can't undo that. So if they get it wrong, that's a big lawsuit, I'm sure. So they got to make sure that, they dot their I's and cross their T's. And apparently at the Chapel of the Pines crematorium, there's a cenotaph to Colin Clive there.
Oh, is there? I have to go look. Okay.
There's a marker, but he's not buried there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And coincidentally, in the cemetery that's kind of next door is, I think, where Todd Browning is buried. There's like a mausoleum there.
That's right. Angelus Rosedale. Yeah. And we didn't talk about, James Whale, the Frankenstein director, he's buried at Forest Lawn, Glendale. Dwight Frye, who played Renfield and Fritz, he's buried at Forest Lawn, Glendale. Elsa Lanchester, who played the bride, died at the Motion Picture Country Home, and was scattered at sea. Charles Lawton, the Hunchback of Notre Dame, is buried full burial at Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills. So they're all over the place. And Colin Clive scattered. You said, he's in the basement, but he has a cenotaph. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. He's still in storage.
No, Clive was finally scattered at sea in the 70s, but there's a cenotaph for him at the crematorium.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
It's wild, right?
Yeah, very, very, very.
It's amazing that 300 people show up at his funeral, but then no one is there to take his ashes and actually bury him. It's like they all were just like, well, I guess that's getting taken care of, so I'll go home now.
Some people, I guess they just don't care. Some people just don't care.
Or look, when you go to a funeral, the family is handling all of that, so you're not thinking about it, I guess. And
somebody paid for the cremation.
Yeah.
Unless that's the reason that he's there, because there's a lot of people that just haven't paid the bill and they're in storage. So that might be part of it too, because he was 37, and those people were not making a whole lot of money. I think Elsa Lanchester, I looked it up. She got paid for Bride of Frankenstein $2,500. That was it. Right. Now today's money, I did a comparison. It's $52,000 today, but that's with no royalties, no residuals, nothing. Right. Just $52K, and she's typecast for the rest of her life.
And that's why a lot of them,
interesting.
That's why a lot of them, like Bela Lugosi, could get destitute pretty fast. Yeah. Even though you think they're these huge stars raking in all this money, they weren't. If you weren't at that top A-list level, you were just making enough to live comfortably, but not enough to, I guess, unless you were really smart with your money, to save it up so that you could survive the lean years.
Yeah, unless you got a piece of the production,
right.
For sure.
Yep.
Because, Bela especially, having no really other career aside from Dracula, you couldn't look at him and not see Dracula. So, it ruined him. It really ruined him. So
Lugosi was both not only ruined by being typecasted, but also we talked about this earlier, his accent and his English wasn't always very clear. It hindered his career going forward. The speaking parts he wanted to get. In fact, one of his later films, they actually dubbed over him, which was very bad for his career. And because he had the Hungarian accent, he had immigrated to the U.S. from Hungary by way of, I think, Germany en route. And kind of was run out of Hungary and was married to a Hungarian woman, and they kind of fled the country together because the political situation changed in the country. But then she didn't want to leave her parents behind. So they ended up divorcing, and she moved back to Hungary. So again, like so many of these stars from that era, I think he was married, multiple times over the years to various people.
Yeah, he had a lot of success. I mean, he was a really wealthy man at one point.
Right.
But they ended up dying in this crappy little apartment building, one bedroom, off of Western in Hollywood.
With parts in Ed Wood movies. That was how it ended.
Yeah.
But his role as Dracula, go watch that movie today. It is what we think of as Dracula is what he did. Like he almost created the mold of the Dracula character with the accent and the hair and makeup and it's when kids dress up as Dracula for Halloween, they're dressing up as Bela Lugosi's Dracula, basically. His interpretation. Yeah, for sure.
And there was, some of it was pretty, it was pretty laughable, some of it. I don't want to it wasn't even just acting. It was just him staring. That's all it was. He moved.
With the really cool
this,
lighting
Joe
just on the eyes.
Lighting.
Yeah. That's that German expression as a man.
Yeah, it was pretty campy. I think in that regard, it's kind of funny when he has that kind of just staring for 30 seconds. I understand the intensity of it in the cinema when you saw it for the very first time. It's just in retrospect when you're watching it on your television in your living room, it's a little bit of a snort when you see it,
And when we did our Freaks episode, we mentioned that Todd Browning, when he wanted to do Dracula, but he wanted Lon Chaney to play Dracula. Mm-hmm. And that was the plan. But then the year before they made Dracula, Chaney died unexpectedly. He was only 47 years old. Had a throat hemorrhage after getting a lung cancer diagnosis. And so Chaney Lugosi was not Chaney, or was not Todd Browning's first choice, but he went with him mm-hmm. anyways. And of course, it became the role that defined the rest of Lugosi's life.
Yeah, and he lived it too. He did that whole live in a castle-y kind of house thing, and the big oil painting, and he was very grand, and it was very. I went to. I worked with a guy briefly at the cemetery, at Hollywood Cemetery, back when I worked there for like 5 weeks in 2005. They wanted me to go door to door selling funerals, and it was awful. It was awful. I went to their whole schooling.
I think I remember you saying this. Yeah.
But you probably heard the story. So then the guy says, "Oh yeah, I live in Bela's old house up in Outlook." And he says, "Hey, I read a biography that he had like panthers buried in the backyard, so I went outside and found them." He went and dug them up, Bella's panthers. It was in this biography, and he went out inside. And he goes, "Yeah, I found them in the backyard."
Actual panthers?
Yeah, I think it was what it was. Either big dogs or panthers, but that was the way they were back then. Mae West had a monkey. I know it's not the same thing, but
exotic pets.
It was a Theta Bara, I think, had one too, but a leopard or something like that.
Right. Well, William Randolph Hearst had an entire zoo at his Hearst Castle. So yeah, I guess it was a flex, a financial flex, I guess. I thought it was. We were speaking of Ed Wood and everything. The Ed Wood film, the one that Tim Burton did. I guess Lugosi's family took issue with some of the creative liberties that were taken with that, saying that Lugosi slept in a coffin, that kind of stuff. Yeah, they're like he didn't.
I got a chance to talk to Martin Landau one time, who won the Oscar for playing Bela. Yeah. I got him to autograph my Ed Wood poster too to Dearly Departed, but that was cool. But anyway, I asked him about that. I said, "Did you Bela Jr.? You obviously Bela. You should say Bela. It's not Bela, but everyone says Bela." What did he have to say about it? And Bela Lugosi Jr., Bela's son, said, "I like everything about what you did, except Bela never had little dogs and he never swore." So that was because he was pretty raunchy with the language. Not raunchy as in, just use some colorful words.
Sure.
And he said Bela would never do that, and he never had little chihuahuas or something like that. That was the only issues he took with it. But he won an Oscar for playing Bela Lugosi, and Bela Lugosi never came within a mile of one.
Right.
So it's kind of funny.
The irony.
Poor Bela. So he was, also he was the first person to go, really the first famous person to go into rehab, that for coke, was it morphine addiction? And,
opiates. He apparently had a sciatica, which is, I had some issues with that. I think last year, extremely painful. The nerve that goes through your hip bones and into your leg,
down your whole leg. Yeah,
it's really sharp, a really sharp, terrible pain. So he was given kind of stronger and stronger treatments for it until they got him on opiates, and then he became an addict. I didn't know about the rehab part though.
Yeah, there's pictures of him being checked into rehab on a hospital bed, looking very old and gaunt. But yeah, I think it was a sanitarium is what they called it back then. But yeah, he admitted himself to it, and it was in all the papers. So he went public. And that's probably why no one would touch him after that. And that's how he got into Ed Wood movies. Because I'd met him on Hollywood Boulevard. That's Bela's old stomping
So talk
grounds.
about that. Let's go into the Ed Wood stuff, because you kind of know a lot about that. And when we did Dearly Departed Volume 1, didn't we go into the cigar shop that he used to go to?
Yeah, which is gone now. Yeah, it's all boarded up and gone. So that's historic footage that we. That is cool. It is. It really is. I mean, that was such a neat place. They had the cigar and the terrazzo out in front of it, and that was the Hollywood Smoke Shop. So yeah, Bela lived over on Western and interestingly, not very far from Vampira, where she ended up dying, literally 3 blocks from there. But Bela, every day of his life, would walk down Hollywood Boulevard to this cigar store and buy himself a cigar. And that's about the time he met up with Ed Wood. And the funeral home where Bela was laid out in his Dracula costume, and not because he chose it, because it's the nicest thing they had. His wife and his son chose it. Not in his cape, though, just the suit. The cape actually got auctioned off a few years ago, and it's going to go in the Academy Museum next year, I think. They're going to show that. But anyway, so at his funeral, Utter McKinley Mortuary, which was across from the Pantages Theater and the Hollywood Smoke Shop, now is the W Hotel, the Utter McKinley Mortuary, who handled Peg Entwistle, who jumped up the Hollywood sign, handled Bela, handled Dwight Frye, we talked about the guy that played Fritz, handled Criswell, handled a lot of those people. Supposedly the mortuary had an agreement with Hollywood Boulevard, and that they would not, or with the Chamber of Commerce, so they wouldn't drive funeral processions down Hollywood Boulevard. So Bela's funeral was at Good Shepherd Catholic Church in Beverly Hills, and he's buried at Holy Cross Cemetery. And they had to get from Hollywood to Beverly Hills. So the legend is that Bela was in the back of the hearse, and the hearse driver was pulling out of the driveway, and he lost control of the hearse. He said the wheel was not literally ripped from his hand, but he could not control it, and the wheel took them onto Hollywood Boulevard. And he said he struggled with the wheel, could not get it under control until they passed the Hollywood Smoke Shop. So they said it was Bela's final farewell to Hollywood Boulevard.
That is really interesting. Wow.
It's a good story. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce didn't want funeral processions ruining the vibe.
Yeah, right?
The classy vibe of Hollywood Boulevard.
Oh, poor Bela. But yeah, so he's buried at Holy Cross in a Dracula suit, but not the cape. And
so the legend is he's buried in the cape. So you're saying that's not true? That's
right. Yeah, I think he was good friends with Forrest Ackerman, and Ackerman was that guy who had everything. He was Mr. Sci-Fi, they called him. He had a house he had a museum, and he was friends with Bela, with all these guys. He had the original cape, and he had the original Dracula ring and all that business. And when Forrest Ackerman died, it all kind of went up into the sky and all landed all over the place. But Bela's cape did go up for auction. I think Julian's. I'm not sure it's sold, but the Academy has it, and they're going to put it in the museum. That's what they say.
That's fantastic. I need to go to the museum. It opened recently, by the way. It finally opened. I have friends who have gone. I have not gone. I have friends who don't live in LA who have gone, and I haven't gone yet.
Well, if you go to my YouTube channel, Mike, I walked through the whole museum with my camera.
Yeah. It'll be like I'm
you'll
actually
see the entire
there.
museum. So
how'd you like it?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I was hoping for a little bit more clutter. You know, I like it
More
to be
stuff.
a little bit more silly and hodgepodge. I don't need it to be designed within an inch of its life. And there was a lot of that, but that's the deal. That's what they did.
Yeah.
They had gajillions of dollars to do it, and they hired, all these people to do it. So I would have liked to see more stuff. The Hollywood History Museum on Highland, I love, because it's just all wacky. It's everywhere.
Right.
Something amazing. The cell from Silence of the Lambs. Oh, there's Mae West's, doors, and it's the kind of stuff I like. I liked it a lot.
And that's in
I didn't.
And that's the one that's in the old barn. That was it DeMille?
No, this one's the old Max Factor Museum.
Oh, okay.
That's right. Hollywood History Museum is across from the Hollywood Bowl in the old barn. You're right. And the Hollywood Museum, I guess they just call it, is on Hollywood and Highland in the old Max Factor building. They just have a cool collection of stuff. But to say, I love the Academy. It was wonderful. Loved seeing the ruby slippers and as a filmmaker, you'll lose your mind in there, with the cameras and et cetera. It was and seeing R2D2 and C3PO, one of the 500 of them, it was interesting, but I liked it. I enjoyed it. I definitely glad I went.
And I'm sure, this is the opening. This is this first iteration. I'm sure over the years they'll acquire more things, and I think they'll have rotating exhibits. I'm also really, really, really excited about the movie theater that they built. Which was somewhat divisive, though, the way it was the design. I think it looks like a big egg, or it's like a ball.
Yeah.
But I think it's freaking really cool, and I can't wait to see a film in it. I think it'll be really exciting.
Yeah,
so.
It'll be. I hope it's. The way they had it set up, because I was one of the donating members, so I got to see the preview before it opened.
Right on.
And so. It was awesome because you had to book it. You had a certain period of time to go. I don't know what it's going to be like otherwise. It was great because there's elbow room up crazy. And there was, you could go up to see the Ruby Slippers. There weren't 10,000 people there. You walk away and they're all by themselves and no one's there, and you can go back. You could really take it all in if you want to. So I don't know if they're going to have a free-for-all policy after this, and there's going to be 1,000 people at a time in each room. But the way I experienced it was really nice. I really enjoyed it.
I'm planning on joining it as a member, and I got I think I did do the early contribution. I think I donated $25 or something like that. When they were first doing their fundraising, right? But I do plan on joining as a member. I'm a LACMA member, and that's next door, so it kind of makes sense to just join both of them, right? And I like supporting that kind of stuff. So
I did $40 or $50, and so I got the invitation out of that. So I was like, cool. That's all right. I'll go for free. Sure.
I think I did look into it early on. I looked into how much you would need to contribute to get your name on the wall.
Oh my gosh.
In the thing. And I think, don't quote me on this, but I think it was $250,000 was the minimum to get up there.
Yeah. It was a poncy, freaking, pretentious. I hate these people. Okay, I'm going to tell you something. These people didn't give a crap about any of this stuff before. The Academy, I'm talking about this. This goes back to Debbie Reynolds again. Debbie Reynolds, hard ass. She bought all those costumes, all those props from classic MGM movies. She spent her entire life. She mortgaged her house to get these things,
to save
these
from
costumes. The freaking 7-year-itch dress. She had she had costumes. She had the witch's hat. She had all these amazing costumes, and not a single person would give her the time of day. The Academy said, "Go to hell."
Right.
They didn't say that. Steven Spielberg, she had a meeting with him personally. No, sell it. David Geffen, no, get rid of it. The Academy, go, get rid of it. We don't want it. And all of a sudden, Debbie Reynolds, it's close to death. She says, "I got to sell this shit," and she, put off on auction. And then they come to Todd Fisher, Debbie's son, and say, "We want to use these costumes of your mother's." And he's like, "What?" He says, "I'll tell you what, I'll do it, but I want you to name, something like the Debbie Reynolds Pavilion in there because she deserves that." It just really, it just rubs me the wrong way. These people didn't, she knew what they had. Her heart was in it, and it mattered to her. And when she died, nobody cared. And now, now they're all about, we're going to put, I love what I saw. I have a real chip on my shoulder when it comes to that stuff.
I guess it's better late than never, but yeah, it would have been nice if she could have got the glory while she was still around. And yeah, I mean,
she worked her butt off. She had like 4 deals. She had Hollywood and Highland was built specifically with her museum in mind, and it fell through. Right. Another one at the corner of Hollywood and Vine was supposed to happen. That didn't go through. Dollywood was supposed to happen. All these investors were like bugging out. And, so now you can pay $250,000 to get your name on a wall. It's like, oh, screw you. Debbie Reynolds will mortgage her house to buy this stuff. And you're going to get your little name on the wall and feel good about that. Eat me. Well, that pisses me off. I'm sorry.
How do you really feel about it, though?
I think I'm just. I really do. I think I'm just in that. I find that to be really shitty. So yeah.
But again, anyway. Better late than never. At least it exists finally.
True.
Hollywood finally has like a big budget, fully funded history museum dedicated to the film industry. So hopefully it'll just only get better and go from here. Yeah. Bela Lugosi. I don't know if we mentioned this. Bela Lugosi passed away from a heart attack on August 16th, 1956, and he was 73 years old. And then he hijacked his hearse from beyond the grave.
Oh, you know what? I met the woman who had the first line in Dracula.
What?
She's in the carriage in Dracula, and she plays this little girl with glasses on. I think she has the first line in the movie.
Sure, when the guy's on his way to the little village next to the castle,
Renfield. Her name was Carla Laemmle, and she was the niece of Carl Laemmle, the producer, the head of Universal Studios, who founded it.
Oh, wild!
And she was doing she died just a couple of years ago. She was like 104, but she was doing a thing at the Hollywood History Museum one night. So I went up there and got to take a picture with her. That was really cool to meet a woman who was in Dracula. In 1931 was really, really neat. And I got another story. I saw Bram Stoker's skull.
What?
Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula, was cremated in London, and he's at Golders Green Crematorium, and he's in a locked area. So this is back in the 90s, early 90s, before there was the internet. So Find a Grave, none of that shit was around. And I was doing some research, so I went to Golders Green. And I was peeking actually in this locked area. Anna Pavlova, the ballerina, is in there. Sigmund Freud is in there. Conrad Veidt, the actor, he hadn't been moved there yet, but he's in there. And he ultimately was in there. But anyway, I talked to a guy who worked there, and he goes, "Oh, I'll show you." So we came on, and he unlocked the door, and we go up this weird staircase, and on the staircase is this little box. This is Bram Stoker on it, and I got to peek in, and he lifted up. And this is when they didn't pulverize. They cremated, but they didn't pulverize yet. So there are bones and bits of skull in there that I saw. So I saw Bram Stoker's skull in real life. And then they let me watch a cremation, which was crazy. They just, they're showing me around, and I got to go to the different, ovens or retorts and see the whole process. It was really, they're so nice. I'm sure they wouldn't do it now, but that's where Amy Winehouse was cremated, and Keith Moon and Mark Bolan and Peter Sellers and all these. George Michael was done there, and Freddie Mercury. So everyone's been done at Golders Green, but yeah.
Wow. Did you want to talk about Lon Chaney Jr.?
No, we can skip that, actually.
And I think we'll probably skip Vincent Price, too.
Yeah. Just as a mention, and then not to be dismissive, because Phantom of the Opera is a great movie. It's a silent movie about opera. Which is interesting to note. I'm just saying. I'm not saying it's lacking anything. I'm just saying it was a silent movie. Who greenlit this? Although it's a classic story. And Lon Chaney, who was also played the Hunchback of Notre Dame before, played the Phantom, and it was really interesting and really very interesting, actually. What was important to me to mention was that on a soundstage at Universal Studios for decades was the original wall from the Paris Opera House from Phantom of the Opera by Lon Chaney. Wow. So it was covered. It was still in the soundstage that they used. And it was covered, obviously while they were filming other things, but it was there. And if you went to the tour, sometimes if they weren't filming in that particular soundstage, stage 28, it was also the stage where they filmed Bride of Frankenstein and Frankenstein. And also it should be noted that the same guy that did the props for Frankenstein was the guy that helped on Young Frankenstein and the Munsters. Because that Universal, that was Universal had the rights to the Munsters because it was Dracula and Frankenstein, etc. But anyway, stage 28 had the original wall from the Paris Opera House with the booth that the Phantom sat in, and they tore it down. We're talking about like 5 years ago. They tore it down.
Right. They still had it.
Yeah. So that is kind of there you are. That's Hollywood. So,
what? I did want to mention. I know we're close to wrapping this up, but we were talking about Lon Chaney, and Lon Chaney Jr. of course was the Wolfman in Universal and all the sequels, the original Wolfman in 41, and then the sequels. I thought it was interesting. He was obviously in the shadow of his father, who had died young himself, and originally wasn't going into acting and didn't really pursue acting until after his father died. And I did not know anything really about Lon Chaney Jr., but apparently his mother attempted suicide in L.A. in 1913. She entered the theater, which is no longer there. It was a theater in downtown L.A., where Lon Chaney, the father, was working. She entered the theater and swallowed a vial of poison, but didn't die. But was no longer a part of Lon Chaney Jr.'s life, and he apparently was led to believe that she was dead and did not know that she was still alive until after his father died in 1930.
Wow, that's something. Yep.
There's some drama.
So she committed suicide in a theater. She tried to, not at home.
She attempted, but didn't succeed. And then I don't know what happened. I don't know if she was committed after that or what happened, but he was apparently estranged from her from then on and was led to believe that she was dead and didn't know it until his father died, that she was still
Interesting.
Alive.
Yep. I knew that Lon Chaney Jr. wasn't called Lon Chaney Jr. until his father died. Right. He changed his own name from Creighton, I think. Right. It was his name. So, and then he became the Wolfman, and then what was that weird? I just read it I just saw it, something like they're the only father-son U.S. postage stamp people.
Oh, really?
They both, when they did the Universal Monsters, both Lon Chaney Jr. and Lon Chaney ended up on the stamps.
Oh, wow.
U.S. postal stamps, different ones. So I think it's the only time that's happened. But and the other thing about Lon Chaney Sr. is that he made like almost 160 films. And of those 160 films, over 100 of them are lost. Just never found. They're just missing.
Something like 90+% of films from the silent era are gone forever.
Yeah. So only 50 of his films out of almost 160 are here. Still survive. It's that's really interesting. Again, it says a lot about. Well, it was a disposable time. Nobody knew it was going to have the longevity. That
also there just wasn't a good way to store it, because film itself is extremely brittle and hard to store long term, and it's extremely flammable. And a lot of these old films were lost to fires, and also they just lost because the film fell apart. And to your point, because they were disposable, and theater houses just threw them away when they were done running them.
Did we ever talk about the silent movie theater murder?
I don't know if we've ever gone into that. No, not on the show. We should.
That's a great story. I mean, it's for a different time, but the irony of that being that the husband and wife that created the silent movie theater, the only American movie theater devoted just to silent movies over on Fairfax, places where Charlie Chaplin would slip in or Clara Bow would slip in during a screening to see their own movies for the hell of it, Yeah. And the man and the woman who created this place, he died from cancer from the chemicals of preserving the films,
Wow.
And also, but I mean, the story about the guy who inherited it, getting murdered we should talk about this sometime. It's so much to take on, but his name was Lawrence Austin, and he was murdered at the box office of this movie theater. But he was a film historian, and they have a lot of prints of movies that were long gone, thought to be gone. So there's a real underground, sort of industry in that kind of thing. A lot of collectors have these things, and you don't know about it, and that's really interesting, because why would you want to keep something like that to yourself? It's so cool. That's the whole reason you have a movie, is to watch it. And what would you do with it if you're just going to have it by yourself, watch it over and over again? It's an ego thing, I guess.
And what also happens is, because the Library of Congress and these other film preservation organizations, what will happen is sometimes they'll find these old films in pieces. They'll turn up. A few seconds of footage will show up in an old trailer that was in the attic of a movie theater for 100 years that someone dug up, and they realize, oh my God, it's in the missing minute of this movie where we've only had 10 minutes of it in the past, and they'll find a way to kind of stitch different pieces together. Or sometimes, because of the way censorship worked back in the early days of film, different cities would have different cuts of the movie because they'd make their own censored cuts to things. It's really wild how they piece together these films to try and preserve them. And who knows what is in people's private collections too that they may not even realize are considered lost films. Or that have
probably that's
them,
the whole point. It's like people that have, dinosaurs in their houses, they spend like $25 million on a Tyrannosaurus Rex. It's like, well, I'm sure there's an underground, ivory, and, there is a whole industry, I'm sure, like that. But it just seems, it's like we talked about James Dean's car. It's like, okay, I have the car. Now what? I'm just sitting in my house and not telling anybody I have it. It's like the whole point of having something that interesting is that you want to show people. So it's also very interesting. But so Lon Chaney, interestingly enough, what he was his pallbearers, that was an interesting list of people. Did you see that? It's like
no.
Paul Byrne, who was murdered. There's another Manson connection. Married to Jean Harlow, murdered in the house, or committed
suicide officially, whatever. Yeah.
Jay Sebring ended up buying the house. Louis Mayer, Lionel Barrymore, Todd Browning, and Ramon Navarro were all pallbearers at Lon Chaney's funeral. Yeah, and he's buried in an unmarked grave at Enforced Lawn, Glendale, in the same mausoleum as James Whale.
Navarro's another one we should do a show on.
Yeah, Halloween night, murdered by hustlers.
We'll find to do one. Yeah, yep.
There's got to be like a heartthrob or something. Just not more silent movies. I can't.
No more silent movies. I can't do the research.
Oh my God, no, it's hard. It's hard to sit through those. I didn't mind. Well, see, Phantom of the Opera, there was like 55 minutes. It's like, yeah, sign me up. I'm good. That's all right.
Also, I love the comedies. Like Chaplin. They're because the physical comedy is so entertaining. You don't even notice the lack of dialogue.
I like the stunt stuff that they did. I mean, that crazy stuff where they're hanging over buildings, Buster Keaton, and or Harold Lloyd, and all those crazy stunts that they did. Yeah,
jumping off trains and things. Yeah.
Why not?
Speaking of film safety.
Man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. That's a good way to end this thing, actually.
We brought it all the way around to
full circle.
Tragedy.
Full
Yes,
circle.
Unfortunately. All right. Well, thanks to everybody. It's the end of our 30th episode. So we went with the 1930s with the Universal Monsters. And
yeah, it was a lot of information. But thank you. Yeah, thanks for watching. I'm glad that you like to spend the time with us, and we enjoy doing this. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and check out our Patreon, our Dearly Departed Pod, over on Patreon, and we $5 subscribers get advanced these episodes a few days in advance, and the $2 subscribers and $5 whoever subscribes, you also get access to we do extra, like what we call mini episodes every time we put out one of these. So
Yeah, they end up being like hour-long episodes too.
Right.
So it's dirt
call them
cheap
mini, but
entertainment.
they're pretty long, yeah. So, and that's where we talk about kind of more recent occurrences, deaths, recent death stuff and personal stuff. So yeah, check it out. And thank you all for listening.
Yeah,
you're amazing.
Appreciate it.
And belated happy Halloween, and have a good November.
Blah blah blah
blah blah.
This has been an episode of the Dearly Departed podcast. Dig up more episodes at dearlydepartedpod.com and on iTunes and Google Play. See you next time.